had to start this conference by explaining the difference between the Purpose-Driven Network and the Peace Coalition. The Peace Coalition is a much wider, broader organization than the Purpose-Driven Network. The Purpose-Driven Network is simply a network of churches. There are no other institutions. There are no entities that are part of it. It's just pastors. And we've had the Purpose-Driven Network now for almost 28 years, having trained about 500,000 pastors in 162 countries. And so one of the most difficult parts of this conference was deciding who I was going to invite. Because when I decided it was by invitation only, and you have met 500,000 pastors, that's a pretty big come down. And so we really did think about it, pray about it, decide who we were going to invite, because I originally was going to only invite 750 pastors. And we sent out some invitations, but everybody, we figured half of them wouldn't come, but everybody came. So we ended up with twice the number than we really expected. I was trying to make it smaller. But the Purpose-Driven Network is just pastors. Purpose-Driven Coalition is a brand new coalition, which we have been quietly preparing for a couple of years while we were doing what we call phase 1 of the peace plan. And there's governmental partners, there are commercial partners, there are institutional partners, there are ecclesiastical partners. So it's all the different areas: healthcare, business, government, churches. It's the different legs of the stool that say, can we get together and actually work on these big problems? And the problems are so big that they're going to require a big response. And when you do a big response, it is extremely complex. This is the most complex thing I've ever attempted in my life. It's 100 times more complex than the Purpose-Driven Network, which is simply just with pastors and all of that, because you have different relationships, and in putting together different projects like the what we're kind of calling Reinventing Healthcare in Western Rwanda, that was a 2-year preparation just to get it off the ground. And when you put together the Ministry of Health of a Nation, the University of Maryland, 3 hospitals, Saddleback Church, and our network of churches, it took us 2 years to put that all together. And I'm a very patient person. I don't attend the peace plan. As I said, we tend to set our goals too low and try to accomplish them too quickly. What we need to do is set bigger goals and spend the rest of our lives trying to reach them. And so this is a lifetime goal. It's what we're attempting here will not be done in 5 or 10 or even 20 years. But anything that's worth it is worth putting the time into.
In addition to announcing and launching the Peace Coalition, you also addressed this new concept, Peace 2.0, which really takes the peace plan you've had in beta test the last 4 years off and extending that to other churches. Is that correct?
Exactly. When we said we want to mobilize over the next 50 years 1 billion Christians, which would be still less than half the church, of those who claim to be followers of Christ, that's like going to the moon. Actually, it's more like going to Pluto, because it's such a huge, huge goal. And then when you say, well, by the way, we're also going to involve government, business, healthcare, NGOs, and all these other things. And so we decided to take on the motif of the NASA program. And in NASA, in going into the moon, they actually did the Mercury phase, and then they did the Gemini phase, and then they did the Apollo phase. And the Mercury phase, the first phase was literally, can we put a man in space and bring him back safely? And our Mercury phase was 4 years long. And we put 7,766 people just from our church. We had a few other churches that we were allowing to beta test it with us. Put them into space, put them overseas in 68 countries, and brought them back. We didn't lose a single one, so that was a good thing. Now we go into phase 2, which we call the Gemini phase. And in the Gemini phase, you start tweaking all of the systems so that people can stay for an extended period of time, and you also start involving other people. And this was a rollout of an initial group. The people here were people who are trainers of trainers in many ways, and we brought them in because they will be teaching it, and they will be training, and they will be hosting, so that we don't want the peace plan to be Saddleback-centric. We want it to move far beyond us, that we have to decrease and the other churches increase. And in the Peace 1.0, one of the things that was quite frustrating to me is I had culled through literally pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of the things we had learned. And I picked out the 35 best things that we had learned, and then I didn't get to share a single one of them because we ran out of time. But what I'm going to do instead is we're going to put that in a report, and we will mail it to everybody in the next month so they can see all of the things that we learned, all by trial and error, which we would have never learned any other way.
Finally, Pastor, before we open up to questions, you started off the conference with your assessment of the state of the church 2008 based on 18 months of conversations with pastors all over the world. How would you prioritize the top 3 or 4 things in the state of the church today?
Well, one of the first things is that the churches have become fragmented and segmented in a large degree, and there are a lot of silos. When you travel as much as I do and you get kind of not just a national picture but an international picture, you realize that there is enormous talent and enormous potential in the church, but it's not connected. And over here, we would find like networks in India that didn't know about other networks in India, and networks in China that didn't know about other networks in China, and networks in America that didn't know about other networks in America, and even in the 35 men that I invited in to speak, practically every one of those men are running a network. They're not all the same size, but they would have maybe 100 churches or 800 churches or 1,000 churches, and many times they had never even met somebody else. And so in many ways, I think the peace plan forces tribes to work together.
And as you said, a network of networks.
It becomes a network of networks. The Peace Coalition is not trying to be a brand, it's trying to be a network of networks where that each of these denominational networks, institutional networks, church planting networks, health networks, fellowship networks and things like that can all come together and say, let's work on these things together. And that's why we call it a coalition, because in a coalition you still retain your identity.
Sure.
We're not trying to create a denomination. We're not trying to create another association. We're just creating a coalition that is working on a specific project together.
What else did you hear